Hi there. My name is Lucas Weiss, and I am the host of the Weesesports Quarantine Chronicles. For today's episode, I'm joined by Chuck Swirsky. Chuck is the current radio voice for the Chicago Bulls and the former play-by-play broadcaster for the Toronto Raptors. In this episode, I chat with Chuck about his early days in radio in Chicago, getting the gig for being the voice of the Toronto Raptors, his famous get out the salami and cheese call, and advice he has for young broadcasters. In addition to YouTube, Weesports Quarantine Chronicles is now in podcast form. So in addition to subscribing to my channel on the bottom right hand of your screen, make sure to like, rate, and subscribe to my podcast on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. This is episode 15 of the Weesports Quarantine Chronicles. All right, on today's episode of the Weesports Quarantine Chronicles, I am pleased to be joined by the radio voice of the Chicago Bulls, Chuck Swirsky. Chuck, welcome to the Weesports Quarantine Chronicles. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you, and I hope you're doing well and trying to get through this.
Yes, I mean we're taking it one day at a time. I'm here just north of Toronto, but hopefully for better days ahead and when we could get back to basketball very soon.
Well, the good news is you're in Toronto, so there you go.
Absolutely, and we'll get into your career calling the Toronto Raptors, but I wanted to kick things off, Chuck, by going back to your first radio show on WCFL in Chicago back in 1979. What do you remember from this show, and how did it shape the rest of your career?
Well, it was August 27th, 1979. In fact, my wife and I were taking a walk because we live in a high-rise apartment building downtown, and we just need to get out. Mm-hmm. And so we took a walk on State Street yesterday, and the radio station studios were located right near Marina Towers. And so I was telling my wife, she's heard this story only like 3 million times, but it was on the 16th floor. The station had just changed formats from rock and roll to news, sports talk. So think about this for a moment. You had probably the demographics of 18 to 45 listening to rock and roll, whether it was the Stones, Led Zeppelin, the Doors at the time, the Eagles, Linda Ronstadt, back in that framework of history, musical history. And so all of a sudden, just like that, they go to news and sports. So the first night we're on the air, I did 7 to 11 o'clock. We had 2 calls. One was the wrong number. And I kept her on the line for 20 minutes. And the other one was a misdial for pizza. And we got into a discussion about deep dish because I really didn't know that Chicago was the home of deep dish pizza. So we got into a discussion on that, and that probably went for 30 minutes, and that was it. I ended up interviewing myself. Chuck, what do you think of the Cubs? That is a great question. And so it went on for 4 hours. And we didn't have any commercials, by the way. So we played what they called public service announcements, where it would be like for state or city notices or something from the ad council. And that was it. And so I probably used every one of them a lot.
And Chuck, for you, I mean, you talked about how this was initially a rock and roll show transition to sports. How are you able to get that same audience to then listen to you talking about sports?
Well, it was difficult initially because, we had no listeners, 0, and without commercials. And anytime you make a radical transition from one format to another, completely opposite on the spectrum, it's going to be difficult. So I knew that to the degree that I went through. I'm sure probably now looking back, I probably said to myself, what am I doing? But, I was very young at the time. It was a great break, obviously, to come to Chicago from Columbus, Ohio.
Mhm.
And so I was very thankful. And because this is Chicago, and this is home of two major league teams, an NBA team, an NHL team, the Big Ten Northwestern's 45 minutes away, Notre Dame is 90 minutes away, and you had just a passionate fan base. So once word caught on that there was something where fans could vent, and we were the only game in town, so to speak. There was no advent of sports talk radio yet. No one was doing sports talk. And so this was seriously a blank canvas for me to paint. And sometimes it was watercolor, sometimes it was pastels, sometimes when I had to get opinionated, it was a little bit on the dark side. But for the most part, it was a vehicle for the listeners really to drive.
And you had the chance to do a lot of different tasks, whether it was hosting radio talk shows, being the Chicago Bulls public address announcer in the early 80s. I'm curious for you, because I know for a lot of broadcasters, preparation is so critical. How does it differ preparing for a radio talk show compared to radio play-by-play?
Well, I mean, the common denominator and the thread that connects the two, obviously, as you mentioned, is preparation. You got to prepare. And if you don't do, a blues singer in Columbus, his name is Dick Mackey. I haven't spoken to Dick since I left, and that was 41 years ago. So he's doing a set with friends at a club, a jazz club. And it was a Sunday night. I will never forget this. It was a Sunday night, and he was a great, and is probably still doing his thing, blues singer. And so my friend knew him. And so during a break after one set, he comes, sits down at the table, and we were probably 15, 20 yards away from the stage. Comes, sits down. My friend introduced me to him, and he was a big sports fan, and he found out that I was doing sports in Columbus. And he said, I'm going to give you guys a piece of advice. I said, what's that? He says, you better take care of your homework, because if you don't, somebody will. And so I had to let that settle and kind of marinate for a while and think about what that meant. And obviously what he meant is that you got to get after it. And because there are a lot of people who are aiming for your job every day. And like, there's somebody right now that's working to get better. And what are you doing? And so it really stuck with me. And it's been my go-to line every time when I think that I'm exhausted and need to take a break. I always think of that line, and I have to get after it. And the preparation actually is fun, to learn about players, to learn about a particular event coming up. No two games are the same. No two rosters are the same. And you can never broadcast to the scoreboard. So like I've been with teams with the Raptors, as you know, and with the Bulls, where we were kind of technically out of the playoff picture by about the 50th game. And so even though mathematically we're still live, in your heart this club's going nowhere.
Mm-hmm.
So you say to yourself, what can I do in the next 30 games that will not allow me to fall victim to that, boy, what am I doing? Where are we going with this? Because every game, even if you have one new listener, that's one listener that's being drawn in and really checking it out for the first time. They may not have intentionally want to listen to a game. Maybe they were just spinning the dials, hitting buttons on a car radio, and they came across some guy doing basketball or sports talk. And to me, that's a compliment. Even if it was by accident or by choice, either way, you owe it as to be focused, to bring it, because that's an obligation. That is a privilege. And so I never took it for granted.
And speaking of preparation, you had the opportunity before you got, calling NBA games to call DePaul basketball as well as University of Michigan basketball. Looking back, Chuck, how were those experiences important for you to prepare to when you got the opportunity to call NBA basketball?
Well, DePaul gave me an opportunity to do this on a regular basis. So for that, I'm very thankful. University of Michigan, though, that was a completely different level. That was like a pro franchise because just of the experience, how Michigan ran its basketball department. I can honestly say, without calling University of Michigan games, I probably would not be in the NBA. And I loved Ann Arbor. I loved everything about that whole environment at a Big Ten institution. It was awesome. But I mean, when I look at the college game, I mean, listen, the pro game is the pro game. It's an incredible feeling doing an NBA game. The college game, if you go into a college game understanding that these are 18 to 21-year-old young men, and they're not perfect. Their bodies have not developed. Their shots have not developed. They're going to make mistakes, plenty of mistakes. And you go in saying, okay, you know what, that's fine. I'm not expecting LeBron James. I'm not expecting Kevin Durant. I mean, even though they were in college for 1 year, in the case of LeBron straight from high school, but they were in college for one reason and one reason alone. They had to wait to get to the pros. Kevin Durant was ready to go into the pros when Kevin Durant was in high school. I get all that. But for 99%, maybe 99.9% of the real world, these kids are in college, hopefully to get an academic degree and to go to class, but also to enjoy their athletic ability on whether it's in a field of endeavor, a ballpark, an arena, a hockey rink, whatever. So Michigan gave me that platform to call at a very high collegiate level and making that jump to the NBA. And from a broadcasting standpoint, it was a big jump. It wasn't a small jump. It was a big jump. And I had to really rework my mojo to call an NBA game. People think, well, it's the NBA, it's fast, it's great. Well, when you're used to doing, I did 14 years at DePaul, 4 at Michigan. When you're doing 18 years of college and you're used to a certain sequence of plays, of the tempo of the game, the rhythm of the sport, and then all of a sudden you're jumping straight into the NBA where they're over the midcourt line within 2 seconds. Then you got to pick it up. I mean, the game's not going to change for you. You got to change to the game. And so that's what I had to do when I joined the Raptors.
And yes, I mean, you had the opportunity to join the Toronto Raptors. I know a lot of my listeners are very interested to hear how you got from the University of Michigan to then the opportunity to come to Toronto to be the voice of a relatively new franchise in the Toronto Raptors.
Well, I mean, it's interesting because when the Raptor job opened, people said, why don't you go for the Raptor job? The Sacramento Kings job was open. Their play-by-play announcer took usually about 25 games off because he had a contract with ABC to do auto racing. And so in 1 week, I actually interviewed for the Raptors and the Kings. And so when I went to interview for the position, it was with Nelson Millman, who ran the Fan 590 at the time. A wonderful person, great sports radio executive. And to this day, if he picked up the phone and said, I need you, I'd be there for him. Now, he's since retired. He's off doing other things that he wants to do. But so we had the interview. And then after the interview, he said, we're looking at a couple other people. I said, I get it. No worries. Do what you have to do. And then a week later, he said, I want you to come back for another interview, which I did. And he goes, we're looking at you. We're looking at another guy. And I said, hey, this was awesome. I appreciate whatever direction you go. And I got the job. And so that was the lockout year of 98, 99. And it coincided with Vince Carter coming to the Raptors. So it was kind of a perfect storm for me. And it was a veteran team. And we were moving into a new building, the ACC, from Sky Dome and Maple Leaf Garden. And so, here I am. To this day, I'm so fortunate because I remember walking into the Air Canada Center and they were still doing the interior work. And I remember I was walking inside with Glenn Grunwald, then the GM, and Richard Petty, then the president of MLSE, and they were showing me around. And it's November of '98, and the lockout was in full effect. And they were taking me through, and they said, this building's going to be up and running in January and maybe February. And so I said, hey, I'm ready to go. And I was just in awe. And as it turns out, the lockout ended and we began in the first week in February. And then our first game at the ACC was against Vancouver, I believe on the 21st of February of '99.
And you talk about, Chuck, coming when Vince Carter was on the team and it was an experienced team. I know that during this pandemic, Sportsnet has reshown a lot of old Raptors footage, including Vince Carter's epic slam dunk contest. I'm curious what you remember from that season and from Vince being in Toronto and how that moment of the slam dunk contest put the Raptors franchise on the basketball map.
Well, obviously I had seen Vince play at North Carolina on television, so I was familiar with him. And, it's not like he was the 17th pick in the draft. I mean, he was, a top 5 pick. So I remember when I was doing Michigan and I had given my notice with the radio station that I was working for in Detroit that I was leaving for Toronto. And I got a call from Brian James. And Brian, who I knew here in Chicago when I was here for the first time, he was a very successful high school basketball coach. And then he went on and got a job with Doug Collins to be an assistant coach with the Pistons because Brian had coached Doug's son, Chris, who's now, ironically, the head coach at Northwestern. So, and Brian is now an assistant at Northwestern under Chris. So tables have turned a little bit with, student pupil and the teacher and vice versa. So Brian invites me over to his home, and he was living in Birmingham, Michigan, a very nice area just outside Detroit. And I walk in and he goes, sit down for a second. So sitting on his couch, I remember this. He's got 2 little rugrats running on the ground. The kids are tugging on my leg. And he goes, Chuck, I want to let you know Vince Carter's going to win Rookie of the Year. He goes, we're going to be good. And this was the lockout year. I said, Brian, that's quite a statement. He goes, Chuck, trust me, this guy's really, really good. And so that first year was the lockout year. We played 50 games in like 100 days. We were playing like all the time. We had 3 times we played, maybe it was 4, but we played back to back to back. And it wasn't like 3 straight at home. Well, I remember one time we had a game in New Jersey, then we went to Chicago, and then we went to Houston, 3 different cities in 3 nights, like the old school NBA days. But I didn't mind it. Everything was new. It was awesome. But one thing was for certain, Vince Carter, from day one, his first game in Boston, it was electrifying. And he brought it every night. And then, of course, the injuries happened. And then he had issues with the front office, and it didn't end well, as we all know. But the good news is that there is a happy ending because Vince and the Raptor fans, I think, and a different generation of Raptor fans kind of broke bread. And now I think one day we'll see his jersey retired.
For sure. And I completely agree with that. And Chuck, you talked about before how, you were the broadcaster during some mediocre years for the Raptors, but you brought such energy and enthusiasm to your broadcast. And one of your most memorable catchphrases, in my opinion, is bring out the salami and cheese. This ball game is over. How did that phrase originate in your vocabulary when calling the Raptors?
Well, I got a call, actually. Well, I got a lot of calls after I said this because no one in the truck, when that came out, they thought, Chuck, what's up with the salami? What did you just say? And I said, okay, I'll tell you afterwards. So like I walk out and I'm thinking I'm going to get fired or I'm going to get censored or whatever. What occurred is that I got a letter, and it was a letter, it wasn't an email. And the letter said, listen, I'm big Raptor fans, watch you and Leo or you and Jack every night. And I'm hungry, but I can't go make a sandwich because I just want to get glued. But listen, when you think that the Raptors won the game, can you just, like say, hey, the Raps have won, and, so I can go to the kitchen and make something. And I said, and he goes, P.S., I love salami and cheese. Mm. So I'm thinking, okay. So a couple games later, I'm thinking, like, how do I incorporate this? And so truth of the matter is, the Raptors were up big. They were up by like 11 points with a minute and a half to go. So Alvin Williams made a hoop and I said, get out the salami and cheese, mama. This ball game is over. And, like Leo and Jack they're looking at me like, what was that? And then the production truck said, what was that? But it caught on. The next night, next home game, people are bringing banners, salami and cheese. Chuck, when are you going to call the salami and cheese? It took off. And I mean, it took off. We had sponsors, Pizza sponsored salami and cheese. We had T-shirts, salami and cheese, banner salami. The players would be checking in, the reserves that would come in to end the game. They want to know, they come by and say, Chuck, have you called salami and cheese yet? I mean, these are players. And so that's what happened.
Well, it's great. And I think that's a great story because it just speaks to, again, trying to bring younger fans into the game. The team isn't necessarily doing well, but they can relate to their broadcaster by providing that energy and enthusiasm that you brought to some seasons that, for many fans, we want to forget just because, it didn't turn out great.
Right. Yeah. No, we had the 2002-2003 season was really, really hard, very hard. And 2003-2004 was very difficult. But you know what? You have to, I mean, this is my passion. This is my love next to my wife and my children. But, the truth of the matter is you can't broadcast to a scoreboard. I mean, like, I get it. We're not going to have a good year. I understand that. Or we had a couple injuries and it looks like that we're going to be fading here because you have to have players. Let's be honest. You got to have the greatest coach in the world. If you don't have players, you're not going to win. And so when that happened, I said, hey, I'm blessed. I've got a chance to call an NBA game doing what I love to do, and I'm bringing it. Now, having said that, you have to protect the integrity of the game. If we're down by 30, you can't act like it's, seashells and balloons, but you still have an obligation to call the game and to make sure that the viewer and listener knows that you're engaged with them.
And Chuck, last season, of course, the Raptors win the NBA championship, and I'm sure you followed their journey. And to me, what was so fascinating was during the NBA Finals, seeing the Jurassic Parks pop up all across Canada. When you were calling the Raptors, did you ever think that basketball could get to that level of popularity and fandom across this country with the Toronto Raptors?
Absolutely, 100%. I think just the mosaic picture of Raptor fans and the makeup and the culture of the city, I mean, basketball was coming on big time. And I mean, the front office and the ownership deserves a lot of credit because they put the piece together. They have a wonderful coach in Nick Nurse. Dwayne Casey was fantastic. Big Dwayne Casey fan, big Nick Nurse fan. It was only a matter of time. And so following their success of a year ago, I was really happy for Larry and Judy Tannenbaum because they have lived and died with this franchise from day one. And so, I mean, when they won the title, I was very, very excited. I really was.
And Chuck, you're now the radio voice of the Chicago Bulls with WMVP. And from my research, that happens to be the same station as your first employer, WCFL. So I'm curious for you as a broadcaster from that first radio show in 1979 to be the voice now of the Bulls. It must be such a nice full circle for you in your broadcasting career.
Well, I mean, if someone ever told me back when I first walked into the studio that one day I'd be the voice of the Chicago Bulls, I don't want to say that, because I mean, I set goals for myself, and I think goal setting is important. Even if you don't achieve those goals, I think it's important that you have something out in front of you that you strive for. Because listen, this is a competitive business. This is a very tough business. It'll break your heart. You know, you go in and the thing that I always tell young people is worry about the job you have, not the job you want. Because if you start, the moment you get and you walk in the door for your first job, and 2-3 months later, you're already thinking about moving out of there and getting your second job and wanting to move up the market ladder, that's not healthy for you. I mean, because people have placed and a trust in what you're doing to work in that particular station or for that particular team. So when that happens, there is a bond, there's a connection. All these things take care of itself. I mean, the Bulls offered me the job. The Raptors offered me the job. You know, Detroit offered me the job. The WCFL, long time ago, offered me the job. Now, was I interested if the job was open? Absolutely. But once I walked in that door, I was locked in, okay? And so when, like, with the Chicago Bulls, I'm all in. Whatever they need 24/7, whether it's marketing, whether it's sales, whether it's a meet and greet with season ticket holders, whatever the case may be, I'm all in, just like I was with the Raptors. During the off season with the Raptors, during those tough years, I picked up the phone and called season ticket holders, thanking them for their participation in going to games, but also if they were on the edge and they were not sure about renewing, I got on the phone and said, hey, listen, you know, let's talk. Let's meet for lunch. I did so many lunches. I killed so many chickens during the summer because I was going to lunch. It was like, what are you having? Chicken, 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 chicken. Now I can't stand chicken. If you don't believe me, ask my wife. I only eat chicken sandwiches on a little bun. But that's not to say our cooking's not good, because it's great. But I eat a lot of chicken. And so all I'm saying is that when you're locked into a job, you're locked into a job.
And that's some great advice, Chuck, because I think for any young broadcaster listening to this, it goes back to what you said earlier. Get after it. And even amidst the pandemic right now, where there are not many jobs, I think for a lot of broadcasters, just keep practicing your craft, because you never know when an opportunity might be around the corner.
That's correct. Absolutely. I mean, we're going through some interesting times in our industry, you know, with furloughs and people losing jobs and everything, and it's a shame. But we'll bounce back. And I'm staying optimistic. I'm a very positive person, but especially during this period, you can practice your craft. You can write a sports script. You can record it on your phone. You can listen to how you enunciate. You can develop a flow. You can be you, so to speak. And just because you aren't out there working at a radio station right now should not preclude you from doing things that can make you better today. Because the habits really you develop today will carry through to tomorrow. You know, that's why it doesn't matter whether it's game 12 or game number 31 or game number 66 or game number 82 or in Eastern Conference Finals. You have to prepare the same way for every game. Because if you start making shortcuts and you start mailing it in, it's going to catch up with you. And it will catch up with you. You may not think so, but it will. Yeah, I mean, if you say, well, so-and-so's not going to play, he's injured, so I really don't have to worry about that guy. Or so-and-so's on a 10-day contract and he's not going to play. Well, those are little things that start adding up, because what it does is in your mind, you're saying, I don't really have to worry about that guy on the 10-day because he's not playing. Well, guess what? When he walks into the arena and all of a sudden a guy goes down with an injury and they bring that 10-day player off the bench, and you haven't done your homework and you don't know where he went to school, you don't know where he grew up, you don't know anything about him, and you're stuck on the radio or television and you're like grasping now for information and you're on your computer while the game's going on trying to find out who this guy is, then that is the first crack in the wall. And you cannot allow yourself to do that. You treat the 15th player on the roster like he was the superstar. No difference, none, zero. And if you don't know a lot about the 15th player, you find out a lot about the 15th player when you get to the arena. You talk to assistant coaches, you talk to broadcasters. Who is this guy? What about his game? And then in that 30-minute window in the locker room, you go up to him and you say, you know what, I'm the broadcaster for the Bulls. You don't know me. I really don't know you, but I like, just give me 60, 90 seconds about yourself. And the best question you can always draw from people is, tell me about you.
Chuck Swirsky, some great advice. He is the radio voice of the Chicago Bulls. Chuck, thank you so much for joining me today and for hopping on the Weesports Quarantine Chronicles.
All right, be well, be safe. Thank you.